throughout my career. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, and so at Metabolic Mind, we talk a lot about the connection between metabolic health and mental health. And I'm curious, in your training and all your years of practice, had you ever heard people talking really about this connection of metabolic health and mental health?
I had, yeah. First time I was exposed to it was I saw Grand Rounds at McLean Hospital with Dr. Chris Palmer, who I'm sure you know really well. And he talked about some cases of reversing schizoaffective disorder and schizophrenia with a ketogenic diet. And this was about 4 years ago. And some of the cases were absolutely mind blowing to me because he was describing people who had sometimes been psychotic chronically for decades on the strongest antipsychotic medications, still psychotic, and yet he was reversing those symptoms with food. It blew my mind. I couldn't believe it. And I probably wouldn't have completely believed it if I didn't know Chris from residency. We've known each other for 20 years. And I know he's a really good clinician and he wouldn't be talking about cases if it wasn't a genuine thing that was happening. And so I was really excited about it at the time. I thought about it. I thought, how can I apply this to people? I figured I'd try it on myself. See if I could do a ketogenic diet and what kind of effects I would have. And so I did at the time. And I probably did it for about 3 or 4 months. And I felt fantastic, as a lot of people do when they, adapt to a ketogenic diet. Um, but I also felt that it was hard to sustain for myself. I had a lot of stress going on in my family and a lot of things that I needed to attend to. And I couldn't see sustaining it myself. And therefore, I felt I'm not sure how some of my very compromised clients were going to be able to sustain this if I felt like I couldn't sustain it. And so I kind of put it on the shelf for a while.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about your journey, though. What helped bring it back off the shelf to start using with your patients and sort of change your practice around?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's where the story gets kind of personal, if that's okay. Um, you know, I, I'm married to a psychologist and we have 3 boys. We live in suburban Boston and we were living a great life. We had our careers and our kids were doing academics and sports and summer camp and we used to travel. And then about 6 years ago, all of a sudden, 2 of my 3 boys became acutely ill with neuropsychiatric symptoms, kind of out of the blue. I mean, literally almost like overnight. And it was, incredibly shocking to us, but it was almost like it wasn't real. It was so dramatic. So they went from happy, adjusted young boys at age 12 and 14 to literally overnight being severely depressed with severe OCD symptoms, suicidal, unable to attend school. And I mean, we just were absolutely devastated. Um, so in that process, and at first we got the best psychiatric treatment we could access, which was very good, obviously, given where we are in our fields and in Boston. And they literally got no benefit from psychiatric treatment, including expert psychotherapy for the conditions that they had. And in fact, what was really hard for me to admit at the time, but I certainly see now in retrospect, the psychiatric medications actually were making them worse, um, which does sometimes happen. And patients and families complain about that. And sometimes psychiatrists, I think, even myself, before this happened, don't really fully listen to that and appreciate that. But it does sometimes happen. Um, and so, we were devastated. It was, sort of like a bomb went off in our life. So I credit my wife, who asked us to kind of look deeper about what might else be going on here. And, we found some other experts and our kids got diagnosed with this condition that's not that well known called PANDAS or PANS, which is an acute psychiatric syndrome in kids which is really an autoimmune process. So it was originally thought of as an autoimmune process based on streptococcal infections. Later on, they've kind of expanded that to be an autoimmune process in response to any infection or other infections. And both our kids were diagnosed with that based on lab work and by some experts, and they got treatments for that. And unfortunately, even those treatments didn't help them. So we're really stuck at this point. And very fortunately, I was able to learn a lot myself and go to a bunch of conferences and meet some of the people in this world, and we were able to access some experts that are really outside of the mainstream of medicine. I would say people in the functional medicine world, the environmental medicine world, people who apply systems biology perspectives to complex chronic situations and understand the science behind all of that, and sometimes can come up with really helpful treatments that are really quite outside the mainstream of medicine. And we felt very lucky that we were able to access all of that, and we got a lot of help. Um, but then I started turning to, what about my patients? I started thinking about my own patients and all the other people with psychiatric conditions that weren't getting better, who are on psychiatric units or in outpatient clinics, and weren't improving. And I was thinking to myself, how many of them had infections or autoimmune processes or toxicities or metabolic disturbances underlying all of that, hormonal imbalances, all of these possible things that can affect things that look just like a psychiatric condition. There's a lot of evidence in the literature that many people do in fact have those things if you go looking for them very deeply, but it's not really the common practice in psychiatry to look deeply for those things. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I
sort of
mean, I can only so sorry to interrupt, but I can only imagine how sort of how helpless and